I've always had an interest in reptiles and amphibians. It probably started when I was old enough to identify a snake in a coloring book. They have held my fascination throughout my entire lifetime. Conservation was always part of what I did and what I was interested in. I saw in the late 50s and early 60s the need beginning then for significant understanding of the animals, which would hopefully lead to preservation of habitat and the animals themselves. It took a while to catch on, but what was so interesting about the 60s, especially the later 60s, is that people were far more concerned, genuinely concerned, than they are now. There's a lot of window dressing out there and a lot of drum beating and saber rattling, but in reality, the people of the late 60s, although they did not have all of the resources and all of the potential information that might be out there these days, they were far more concerned, and in a genuine way. I think if that generation had been able to survive without being crushed by what we fondly term the machine, I am being, of course, very facetious, that some good things could have happened to this country that never did. First of all, I don't like to give opinions, because my opinion is worth the same as your opinion. Nothing. If I give you anything, it will be a view based on practical information and experiences that I've had. In reality, I don't know that we're going to have functional conservation in the form that's necessary in the near future. I think it's going to be gone. With what's going on culturally in this country, with what we are losing, with the pervasive attitude that a six-pack of beer and a color TV set is what life's about, I don't know that conservation will exist anymore. Certainly other countries are taking a very different view than the United States, many other countries. They may be the ones who will be leading whatever fight there may be to preserve the last remaining areas on this planet that are of truly pure natural resource, natural condition, whatever you care to term it. We have lost so much in just the last 50 years that it's almost unconscionable to think about. It's certainly depressing. I know that when I was much younger, I was able to go several places where I could prove that in historical times man had not been. There is not a person on this planet today, I don't think, who will be able to ever enjoy that feeling. With the incredible overpopulation of human beings, with our loss of resources, with our lack of understanding of what we have done, with the incredibly dangerous regulatory situations that we have, the overregulation of almost everything. We are undereducated and overregulated. And by education, I don't necessarily mean that it has to be formalized in a school somewhere, but rather an attitude and a culture that would promote acquisition of knowledge, accurate acquisition of knowledge. We don't have that anymore. We don't have a lot of Platos and Socrates in this day and age. And as they did in the golden age of Greece and even the Roman times, I think we have long lost that particular form of Renaissance here in this country. And it has been beaten down by both the cultural climate and certainly the industrial climate that we have in the United States. The Orinoco crocodile is not really a success story. It is a giant crocodile found in the Orinoco Basin in South America. At one time, it was quite populous. There were large numbers of these giants. They are a slender-snouted species, a beautiful crocodile. They can be almost white in color. They were down to estimated populations of between 300 and 500 animals total, and were spread out so far they couldn't find each other to breed. So captive breeding programs were instituted with some success, but unfortunately, they didn't look past the production of babies. And consequently, the mechanism by which they were looking at reintroduction was a rather unsuccessful situation where they would each year take bucket loads of little baby crocodiles, pour them into the river in the same place, and wonder why this didn't increase the numbers. And it wasn't for lack of people who wanted to do the right thing. It was just simply a lack of information on their part to be able to do it right. One of the most valuable lessons we've learned from the Cubans with the Cuban crocodile is that when you're releasing animals, especially crocodilians, into the wild, you need to choose certain numbers and certain size classes that you're going to put back in there. Otherwise, you have the same size animal all eating the same size prey, and the next thing you know, that's gone. There's nothing for them to eat. You end up with cannibalism, you end up with all sorts of other problems, not to mention you're disrupting the ecological balance in that part of the river by doing that. So what you need to be doing is, for instance, taking 12 yearling babies and maybe 5 2-year-olds and maybe 2 or 3 3-year-olds and maybe 1 4-year-old crocodile and releasing them in a particular area so that you will get something that's not a stratified population. I've been down there a number of times, and some of the people on the farms are beginning to look at my ideas and think that they may have some merit. Certainly, again, there are people down there whose hearts are in the right place, but they just don't have the experience of and an understanding, fundamental understanding of how some of these things work. Places where they have done that type of destratified reintroduction, they have had much, much better luck with the crocodilians. The Cuban crocodile suffers from some unique problems. We have, first of all, turned Cuba into the devil off the coast, when in fact, if you go to Cuba, you find out it's the cleanest island still left in the Caribbean. Americans are not just welcome there, they're enthusiastically welcome, which is more than we do to the Cubans. I have never, ever had a problem in Cuba. They are hospitable people with a great interest in the wild world in many instances. They certainly have a great interest in culture. They have a great interest in medicine. Tend to be very well-educated people. Their educational system is, on one hand, very poor monetarily, but very rich educationally. We did a little work with some of the school kids over there and found out that an 8th grader in Cuba is equivalent to usually a junior in high school to a senior in high school here in the United States. By then they have learned 2 or 3 languages. They have tremendous science programs. And unlike the idea that this is this gray, horrible communist country, it's actually a very interesting place. They don't have much money, and that's because of the United States pretty much proscribing them. But it is an interesting place to go, and many lessons to be learned. The Cuban crocodile was reintroduced by the Cuban people over the last almost 50 years. Different breeding programs, different methods, and they were one of the first ones to do this destratified reintroduction work. Worked beautifully for them. Unfortunately, they are now up against another problem, they meaning the Cuban crocodiles. Canals were cut into the Zapata Swamp area, which is where the Cuban crocodiles are found. And by the way, they have the smallest home range of any crocodilian in the world. They're only found in 2 places, the Zapata Swamp, which is more like a rocky freshwater area than a swamp, and the Isle of Youth or Isle of Pines off the coast of Cuba, where they historically were found. They were pretty well wiped out, and now they have reestablished themselves there, thanks to a very effective breeding program and one bad hurricane, where many of the animals were washed out of the compound where they were breeding them, and you had sort of a destratified population automatically by the breeding group getting washed out into the wild. They reestablished themselves, are doing very well. Unfortunately, in the Zapata Swamp, they cut canals in late 1800s, early 1900s to try and get minerals out of the area. They never closed those canals up. American crocodiles, which is a completely different species, made their way up from the coast into the Zapata Swamp and started hybridizing with the Cuban crocodiles, pushing the Cuban crocodiles into a situation of undergoing a genetic storm from the acutus. So just when we thought we had a great success story, once again, an unforeseen situation comes in and we have a problem, a big problem with these hybrid animals. How we're going to stop it? Well, I've tried to raise funds for getting crews in there to start dynamiting some of that and closing some of those canals. But you truly need an experienced construction company to go in there for several months and do nothing but close probably at least a mile of each one of those canals, because American crocodiles have a great deal of fidelity to their nest areas. Once they find a nest area, they will always come back to it. And they're not afraid to travel overland a bit to do so. So you'd probably have to close at least a mile on each one of those canals to stop this influx of American crocodiles. It's a very sad story because the Cubans really did a terrific job. The hawksbill turtle in Cuba is also a very interesting situation. There was a lady, a very big strapping lady named Elvira, who was in charge of their fisheries and aquatic vertebrates. And she had just incredible programs established in Cuba. The fishermen were all well educated about which animals to take which time of year, so that the Cubans actually had a very healthy aquatic ecology. Included in that were the hawksbill turtles. The number of hawksbill turtles in Cuba, and this is the turtle that they always made tortoiseshell items out of, the number of hawksbill turtles in Cuba is probably higher now than it was in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, just because of these programs. So the Cubans felt that they were justified in taking some of these animals out of the wild as a commercial product. They also discovered a humane way of killing the turtle and not losing the luster in the shell, something that's far too gruesome for me to go into in this conversation, but the way they used to kill them was just horrific. And this was all in order to keep the luster in the shell and the color in the shell. Again, where the popular tortoiseshell products came from. Sitting in warehouses, the Cubans have millions of dollars worth of these hawksbill shells. They are not allowed to sell them because the hawksbill turtle is, in fact, a CITES-listed endangered species. There is, an upside and a downside to this. The Cubans could use that money for additional conservation. The officials claim that the reason they won't let the Cubans sell them is because this will encourage a market and start developing a situation where other people were trying to kill these in the wild and make money off of it. I'm somewhere in between on that whole thing because the Cubans have laser marked a lot of their products in a way that's hard to copy, and I think that they should be rewarded for the great conservation work that they did and be allowed to sell these products and make some money off of them so they can increase their conservation efforts in other areas. On the other hand, there are unscrupulous individuals who might abuse this and start killing wild hawksbills in other places. Due to the types of hunting pressures that have been put on these animals, you have them breeding at smaller and smaller sizes. If you look at some of the skulls of the old gators that were caught back in the mid-1800s, they're very different from the skulls of the alligators of today. They were bonier, bigger, heavier animals. We're very proud all the time saying that we don't kill any animals under 6 feet long. We really shouldn't be killing animals over 6 feet long because these are the most important parts of the population, the little animals being the most expendable. The big bulls who live for a long time and produce the most babies and make the biggest water holes, which of course during times of drought protect so many animals from dying out, are the ones that are the target of these hunts. Everybody wants the big trophy animals. Realistically, many of the deer populations have suffered the same thing, where they've changed our deer populations by selecting against the biggest and most robust animals, the animals that had the best genetics. So it's certainly another difficulty. And now with the fertilizer runoff and the sex problems that are going on with the American alligator, I think we have insofar as any of the conservation programs that the Conservancy or I've been involved in, they've been myriad. Everything from the Chinese alligator program that I'm reasonably well known for, to the Philippine croc program with the Mabuaya Foundation. I've been hand in hand with them for many years and have worked on and participated in the reintroductions of these animals and also hopefully augmented their survival. We've got a tremendous survival rate on these animals. I've been involved with the Central African Crocodile Project. It was my project initially and continues to exist in one form or another, which is mapping out the current status of the Central African crocodiles, both the dwarf crocodiles and the slender-snouted crocs and the Nile crocodiles. The dwarf crocodiles, many, many years ago, back in the late 1960s, I took exception to the classification and said, as far as I was concerned, it looked like Crocodilus, or Osteolaemus tetraspis rather, was in fact at least 3 different animals. Well, it turns out that after all these years of me banging that drum, now that we have the genetics and the morphological data to go with it, that I was correct in that. I have been involved in genetics programs with the boa constrictor, behavioral